All right. Now we're going live on YouTube. And now let's begin. Okay, welcome everyone. Oh, we got someone here. Okay, Susan. All right, Susan. Okay, she's coming on. And make sure she's able to get on now. Okay, Susan, are you able to get on? Can you hear me?
Bless you.
Why is this not? Okay, here we go. All right, everyone sees this now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to begin with a little video. Hope you'll be able to hear. Susan, are you able to hear me? Susan Reed? You're muted, so I can't hear if you're responding.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, good.
During the holiday of Passover, it is forbidden for a Jew to eat or own chametz is any product that contains grain that is leavened or risen. In biblical and Talmudic times, people would simply finish whatever grain products they had in their homes.
What happened there?
Before the holiday commenced.
Sorry.
If a small amount remained, they would destroy it or sell it to a non-Jew, and it was never seen again. However, in the 16th century, complications arose. The Jewish population in Poland was growing, but they were forbidden to own land. To make a living, many Jews leased taverns and sold alcohol, which is mostly grain-based. But what were they supposed to do over Passover? Liquidating the alcohol before the holiday would have caused huge financial loss. This became a widespread dilemma. A great authority of Jewish law, Rabbi Yoel Sirkis, known as the Bach, searched for a solution. He found a precedent in the Tosefta, a work from the Mishnah period that supplements the Mishnah. The Tosefta considers the case of Jews traveling on a ship over Passover. In those times, travel could take weeks or even months, and passengers usually had to provide their own food. If the travelers were to destroy their chametz before Passover, what would they eat after the holiday while still on board? The Tosefta ruled that Jewish travelers were permitted to sell their chametz to a non-Jewish passenger and buy it back after Passover. Intending to repurchase chametz after Passover is thus acceptable, as long as during the holiday a Jew does not own the chametz. Rabbi Yoel Sirkis cited this as precedent and allowed the tavern owners to use this mechanism. He issued detailed guidelines to ensure that the sale would be authentic and legal. Today, most Jews rely on Rabbi Sirkis's ruling. The chametz one doesn't wish to destroy is sold to a non-Jew and bought back after Passover. To ensure that this transaction is done correctly, it is customary to authorize a rabbi to make this transaction on our behalf.
So what we see here is how rabbinic rulings can affect many areas of Judaism, areas that we don't even know about. So, by the way, as a side note, this whole thing about selling the chametz became an issue this year with the whole Corona thing, because some rabbis didn't want to sit together with other people, so there were some ways of doing it by just sending it over the fax. And usually when I do it, I actually give the chametz from the community to another rabbi, and he sells it to a non-Jew. This year, I wasn't able to see the rabbi in person. I had to fax, not fax. I had to email all the people that had sold the chametz from our community. Anyway, that's just a side point. So let us begin. We're on page 70 in the book. You know, they say the story of the fiddler on the roof, right? You all know the fiddler on the roof, and they say about the young lad that he approaches the rabbi and he says, Rabbi, I want to ask you a question. And he says, what's the question? He says, is there a proper blessing for the czar? And the rabbi says, of course, the blessing is, may God keep the czar very far away from us, right? You all remember that story in Fiddler on the Roof. But the truth is, I don't know if any of you know that there actually is a blessing to say on a czar or any king or any very important person. There is actually a blessing to say. As a matter of fact, there's a blessing to say with almost everything in life. There's a blessing for. These are blessings that have been taught throughout the generations. Here's a few examples. We light the Shabbat candles. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Shabbat kodesh. Right? There you go. That's one. Another one is the blessing of the Hanukkah lights. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Chanukah. Another blessing, washing of the hands. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al nitilat yadayim. Right. So here you have all these blessings, and where do they really come from? Did it say anywhere in the Torah is there anywhere in the Torah that says that you shall make a blessing on washing your hands? It can't be that there is, because that whole thing came much later. It's a rabbinic clause we'll talk about. Could there be a blessing in the Torah that says you shall kindle Hanukkah lights? Not only is it not there, it's not even possible to be there. Because when did the whole mitzvah of Hanukkah lights commence? Almost 2,000 years later, 1,500 years later, is when the whole event of Hanukkah took place. So obviously, you can't say that the Torah is commanding us. If you comb through our Bible, we see all these things. So where do we find these blessings? So if you take a look in text number 1, the Talmud addresses this with regards specifically to the mitzvah of Hanukkah. It's on page 71 in the book. What blessing is recited on the Hanukkah candles? Asks the Talmud. For kindling the menorah. One recites the blessing, blessed are you, Lord, our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us to kindle the Hanukkah lights. But where did he command us? Rav Avia says in the verse, you shall not divert. What is the verse, you shall not divert? So he assumes that there is a verse in the Torah telling us you shall not divert. And it says like this, text number 2. So where did he command us? The Talmud, the Deuteronomy says as follows. If a matter, putting it up on the screen, says from the verse, you shall not divert. That's what Rav Avia says. That's where it comes from. What is the verse that he's referring to? You shall not divert. It says like this. If a matter eludes you in a case involving capital punishment, litigation, leprous marks, a case where there is a dispute in your cities, then you shall set out and go up to the place that God your Lord shall choose, referring to the holy temple. You shall come to the Levitical priests and the judge who will be in those days, and you shall inquire, and they will tell you the words of judgment. You shall do according to the word that they tell you from the place the Lord will choose, and you shall observe to do according to all they instruct you. You shall do according to the law they instruct you, and according to the judgment that they say to you. You shall not divert from the word they will tell you, neither right nor left. So this is the verse that Rabbi Avia is saying. Where did God command us to light the Hanukkah menorah? He commanded us in the verse, you shall not divert, which is referring to the mitzvah of listening to the sages in those times. And this is seemingly a obligation. First, you have a more narrow obligation saying that you shall go, if you have a specific question, to go to the rabbis of the time, present it to them, and see what is the right way to go about it, and not to come to decisions on your own. And then the more broader obligation is you shall do as they instruct. And if there is a rabbinical commandment, then it is a mitzvah to follow it. So this is what the passage is telling us. that the Jewish people have to follow the rulings of the rabbis. At that time, you had the Sanhedrin, which was the higher rabbinical court, and you would go to them if you have any specific question. That question would be presented to them. If there was a lower question that doesn't need such a high court, it would be brought to a lower court. But the last verse is saying that in addition to not only questions that come up, how do we go about certain laws, but also in general, anything that they say, you shall not divert, which means that they have the ability to bring about a law, and it would be the Jewish people's responsibility to follow that law, just as the Sanhedrin enacted, or just as the rabbis enacted, or for example, the Hanukkah candles, which came so much later. It didn't come until about 200 BCE, even less, 150 BCE is when the Hanukkah story happened. And here, and here, the Torah is saying this is a brand new mitzvah, so to speak, and yet still you have to follow the rabbis. So text number 3, Maimonides says, it follows therefore that when we mean to say that who sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us to listen to those who commanded us to listen to the Hanukkah light. So basically what we're saying when we say that God commanded us to light the Hanukkah lights, what's he saying? He's saying, it's as if we're saying, who sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us to listen to those who commanded us to kindle the Hanukkah lights. So we're not saying that God directly commanded us to kindle the Hanukkah lights, but we're saying that God commanded us to listen to those who are commanding you to kindle the Hanukkah lights. Based on this, we now have another category of rabbinical law. The first week we talked about received law, okay, which is the God-given explanations for each of the commandments. That's the first level of the oral Torah. The second part of the oral Torah is derived law. These are laws which are derived from the written Torah and the received oral Torah. For example, when we talked about not eating milk and meat, not eating the milk and the mother's, not eating the kid and the mother's milk, where we learn a number of different laws from that. And then we have now the legislated laws. These are laws that are legislated by the rabbinic sages. Now, within that, there's a number of different laws. We're going to break this down, because we gave an example of Hanukkah lights, which is a completely new law. But there are also laws which are connected to biblical laws, as we'll soon see. So many people, when it comes to this area of Judaism especially, become very uncomfortable. And they say, well, who are these rabbis? Who gives the rabbis rights to decide what I can eat and what I can't eat? Who gives the rabbis rights to tell me that I can't eat chicken and meat, as we'll soon see? Who gives the rabbis rights to decide what I'm allowed to do? It's also fascinating that many of those same people who come with that claim, as a side note, they very happily celebrate the mitzvah of Hanukkah while eating a turkey cheese sandwich, even though both of those are rabbinic laws. But anyway, there's much to say about the sentiment, and there is a certain there is obviously we can understand this to a bit, saying that why there's emphasis on individualism and self-determination. People have become more skeptical and disgusted by those in power. Many people don't like the rabbinical legislation and that process. But let's first talk about this. Why does it even matter? Does God even care whether we listen to rabbinic laws? So if you take, for example, let's just draw a comparison to the legal system in the United States. So let's say you have the FDA and the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, and they say, now we have an issue with COVID, and they say, okay, you can go ahead and find a cure to COVID-19, and someone and they say you need to adhere to these rules, follow to these rules, okay? Then you go ahead and Congress is going to go and say, this is the rule that you have to follow the FDA, but ultimately the FDA is giving the power to those in charge, giving going ahead and making that medication and seeing that it works. And if someone else is going to come down the line and there's another FDA leader, there's another director, then that individual is going to be making the decisions. Now, of course, it's an oversimplification because there's a problem. Because you can't just say that the Torah is saying, okay, go ahead and do whatever you want. Go ahead and make sure everything complies with the Torah, and now it's an open game. And actually, the Talmud and the Medrash does address this issue, and it says, if you look at text number 4, a person should not say, I will not comply with the sages' enactments because they are not Torah laws. God tells such a person, my child, is not proper to say this. Rather, obey all that they tell you, as it says, you shall do according to the law they instructed. Why? Because I agree with their words. So we see that God does care about what they do, and it's not that he's giving an open slate, but he's saying that I agree with what they're saying. In other words, God is saying that I am allowing them to do so. Why is God allowing them to do so? Is it that God is just giving an open checkbook and saying, go make any law that you want? So clearly not. Obviously, that's not what it is. So the answer is that there is certain guidelines in how to make the right decisions. And if you have the right guidelines and you're following the way the Torah wants us to follow, then you will come to the right decision. An interesting anecdote, a story to explain this. Rabbi Yecheskel Landau, known as the Maharal of Prague. He's also the famous rabbi who made the Golem of Prague. I'm sure you've heard of the Golem of Prague. So he was very much, the whole reason that he made the Golem was because he was always being challenged by the church in his days in Prague, which was very, very strong and powerful. They were always challenging him in different ways, and then there were many blood libels because of it. The blood libels continued on, and that was one of the main reasons that he made the Golem, to combat all the blood libels that were taking place. But he would always be challenged by the priests of the time, and they would ask different questions in Torah law. They were very knowledgeable in the Talmud. They knew everything when they came to challenge, and he always gave proper answers. But in one time, they gave a question, and he answered incorrectly. And of course, the detractors, they celebrated this victory, and he pointed out that he knew that the question was only a theoretical one and not a practical relevance. And therefore he made a mistake because it was not actually relevant in any practical way. And he said, how do you know? And they said to him, how do you know that there is no practical relevance to this law? And he said, because God assists rabbis to answer questions properly so that a Jew can observe Torah mitzvahs properly. And the fact that I gave the wrong answer to this question means that there is no practical observance, and that's why I didn't have any godly assistance in making the right decision to this law. So God is, so to say, the rabbi's partners in making that decision. And truth to be told, it's not rabbi, anyone that studies Torah has the ability to do so. And I'm going to give you an example of this. We're going to attempt to go through this process, and we're going to do a little exercise. I hope everyone has their textbook for this. If you don't, I'll read out these. If you have the textbook, it will be much easier to follow in the textbook. I'm going to give you 3 cases. Okay? In each of these 3 cases, I want you to be the judge. Okay? Or you be the sage, however you want to put it. And I want you to decide and tell me what you think to do. These are all going to be cases which are what we'll call, they're not modern, so to speak, in our modern times, but they're modern in the sense that at the time that they're brought up, they're modern questions without at all being addressed in the Torah in any way. So let's read through them, and I want to see what would you do in this particular case. The first case is as follows. It is the first, it's page 75 in the book if you have it. Okay? In the first century of the Common Era, and pirate activity on the Mediterranean is rampant. In addition to the plunder of personal property, the pirates sell the passengers and seamen into slavery. Representatives of the Jewish communities around the Mediterranean endeavor to buy captive Jews in order to set them free. The pirates often demand that Jews pay higher prices than what they usually charge slave buyers. While the community is committed to performing the mitzvah of redeeming captives, oftentimes the communal coffers cannot bear the burden. There are also rumors that the pirates are specifically targeting Jews. Okay, what shall be done? You understand the issue? The issue is that you have pirates who are specifically targeting Jews because they want the Jews to pay higher prices than what is usually charged for slave buyers. So what should we do? Do we say pay the pirates and save a Jew? Do we say don't pay the pirates? Or do we say something else? Can anyone answer the question? What do you think? If you want, you can unmute yourself or just write it in the chat. What do you think? If you're the sage, if you're the rabbi, what would you do? You have Jews being attacked every day. What do you do? Anyone? Anyone in the chat room?
No, I just think I don't have an answer. I just think it's a tough one because if you pay the higher price, aren't you would be encouraging them to continue doing that, to continue to enslave Jews, but then you want to save a life as well. So it's kind of I don't know how I would handle that one.
Okay, well the question comes up. You have to give an answer.
Yeah, it's tough.
You need to give an answer. Your rabbi presented with a question. What do you do?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to put that one on hold, and I'm going to go to the next case. Let's go to case number 2. Case number 2 is as follows. This was a little bit before. It is during the lifetime of King David. Amnon, let me just see if anyone wrote anything in the chat box. Amnon, David's son, developed intense feelings of lust for his half-sister Tamar. He pretended to be sick and asked Tamar to prepare and serve him food. But when they were alone, he raped her. Avshalom, Tamar's brother, had Amnon murdered in revenge. Would you enact anything because of this? Or would you leave the case alone and say, it is what it is? Or would you, as the king, King David, you can enact anything that you want. You're the king. What would you do? What would you say in such a case? This one perhaps may be a little more difficult because it has to do with some laws that may not be so clear. Okay, we'll go to number 3. We'll go to case number 3. And then if anyone wants to weigh in any of these cases, you can do so. Jewish holidays are exciting and meaningful. However, it seems that many members of the community are so busy with their daily struggles that they are underprepared for the holidays. In addition, many people find it hard to remember all the holiday laws from year to year, such as the laws pertaining to building a sukkah or baking matzah. Okay, does this mean anything? Do we ignore it? Do we not care that they don't know how to do it? Do we try and do something about it? Any suggested enactment? Anyone want to weigh in any of these cases? If you were the rabbi and you saw this is a crisis in your community, what are you going to do? By the way, just now you had an issue that came up, a very big issue. You had Jews who were praying in synagogues for 2,000 years, since synagogues were invented. Okay, for over 2,000 years, Jews were praying in synagogues. Rabbis of our time came along and said, now, after 2,000 years, you need to shut down your synagogues. Never in history has it been done that the rabbis say all synagogues have to be shut down. It's a brand new thing, never happened before. It was enacted by the rabbis of our time. A new law that when there is a dangerous virus going around, you are to shut down all the synagogues in order to protect the people. A new law was enacted right here. We are listening to history. Then 100 years from now, they'll be talking about, look what was enacted by the rabbis in 2020. Anyway, that's just a side point. So if nobody wants to weigh in, then let's look at the way the rabbis at the time went about dealing with this situation. The first situation, the first case, the case of the the ship. So this is what we would call tikkun olam. The term tikkun olam is referred to today by people that like to use it as a way of performing mitzvahs. But in general, what does it mean? It means for societal remedy. It means for an issue that is for the world. In other words, not as opposed to a religious remedy. The other things are religious remedies. This is a societal remedy for society. We have to make a rule, we have to make a law that is going to affect society now. So what did they decide? Text number 5, Gittin 4:6. For the purpose of tikkun olam, for societal remedy, do not redeem captives for more than their value. Okay? So that means if someone is captured, you could pay up to what the value of that captive is. For more than that, you cannot. So tikkun olam. Why? 2 reasons. Number 1, because that would cause an immediate financial strain on the community. And second, if you have to be paying so much money, and the community is not ready for that. Or another reason would be for future concern that they may take captives again. And then what are you going to do? Someone wrote something in the chat box. And by the way, from Sherry Borden, it is not a new law. It's putting the health of people above the physical presence in the synagogue. It doesn't diminish the presence of God. Exactly, that's true. None of these things are technically new laws. Okay, it's about finding a legislation within the law and making the right decision. So to clarify, these are not necessarily enacting new laws, but this is making some of these are enacting new laws. There is a number of different types. Okay, but I hear what you're saying. The point is that in every there's always questions that come up that you need to legislate. And yes, you are correct. In the case of the synagogues, they didn't actually enact a law and say from now on you won't be praying in synagogues. Yeah, but and anyway, getting back to the case over here. So this was. This was actually a law which did come about, and that is that for tikkun olam, for societal remedy, we don't pay more than the value. And by the way, you don't think of this as an old question as pirates. This is a very, very relevant question today, because God save us, there are there are captives in the land of Israel, unfortunately, that happen all the time where terrorists take people captive, and it comes a question: should we pay for terrorists? Should we pay for that? Should we pay the price they're asking or not? And it's a big question. And it's a question that we actually had an entire course about, and we had an entire lesson on this. But in general, the law is for the purpose of tikkun olam, we don't pay more. Okay, next. Tikkun hadat. Making conditions to suit a situation. Who determines the value of the captive? So the answer to the value of the captive is whatever is the going rate of an enslaved of a slave at that time. Now, today that's true. Today it's a different question. And I can't really, it's a little bit beyond the scope of the course discussing about the hostage situation today, but in those times, there was a price for slaves. There was a price for slaves in the market, and determining the value would be whatever that price would be, the going price then. As far as it is today, again, it's a lot more complicated. Next, then you have the second type of legislation, which is called tikkun hadat, which means something that is for a fence, making a fence around laws of Torah so that you would not come to transgress the law in the Torah. Until, and this is with the case of Amnon and Tamar when he raped her, until then, there was no official law that said that a unmarried man and an unmarried woman cannot be secluded together. But with this, they made the law, text number 6, when Amnon raped Tamar, King David and his court prohibited the seclusion of a man with an unmarried woman. So this is what's known today as the laws of Yichud. And that means even if one is not necessarily doing anything, you're still not allowed to seclude yourself in a private room. This was to protect both of them from biblically violating from violating a biblical commandment, and it was to protect them because of what happened with the rape at the time, so that people should not come to God forbid be in that case. Now, being in a secluded place with a married woman is a biblical law that you're not allowed to do that. That's where the whole concept of the sota, the adulterous woman, comes from. But I don't know why I can't get the chat box open. But to be secluded with just a non-married woman, that there is no biblical law against that, but that is a fence. And the fence they made around that is that you cannot be secluded to any degree of bonding. As it say here, the seclusion of a male and female creates a subtle degree of bonding, and the presence of others acts as a deterrent, so you shouldn't come to anything. It is, I should mention as well, today in our time we have the new concept called the Me Too movement, and had this law be enacted in our society, that you wouldn't come to all the rapes that we're seeing today with the so-called Me Too movement. Why can't I get the chat box open? I don't know. Here's a few more examples of building a fence. Okay, so you have building a fence, what we call sometimes an example of a gezerah, or a Torah prohibition, that our sages said you cannot eat. When it says meat and milk, they added the law fowl. You can't add chicken and milk either, or any fowl. Sorry about that. The Torah says that you cannot eat meat in its mother's milk. So that's only referring to animals, as we said last time, which actually come from its mother's milk. But the same is not true about chickens and about turkeys and about any fowl. And nevertheless, they made that gezerah, they made that law, because in most cultures, including in our own, when you say the word meat, that includes chicken, that includes all sorts of fowl. If you're going to a deli, you'll see that there's lined up, together with the pastrami and the salami, you also see turkey. It's one and the same. It's just another type of meat. You don't make that mistake about fish. A fish is never going to be confused with meat, but fowl is. So that's why we say text number 7 is a decree lest the matter lead to harm. People might say fowl with milk is permitted because the verse only forbids a kid in its mother's milk. Similarly, then, the meat of all animals is permitted with the exception of a goat. Another will add, even the meat of a goat is permitted with the goat's milk, as long as the milk is not from its mother. For the verse only says its mother. So these are all ways of that people shouldn't come to try and change the law, or to try and misuse the law in any way. Because once you say you could eat chicken with milk, then you could say you could eat any meat with milk, and you could say, well, it's only talking about meat of a goat. It's only talking about meat of its mother. And there are people till today who try to use it in that way. Yeah, I wasn't able to open the chat box, but now it is open. Rape is never acceptable. No one should be above the law. The son should have been prosecuted before the brother took the law into his own hands. Yes, but we're not talking about in the case before. We're not talking about rape. The legislation is not that you're not allowing rape. That of course is not allowed. Legislation is that you can't seclude with an unmarried woman. That's what the legislation is. Just being together in the same room, solely just two people, even if they are if they are as long as they're not married, that is what the legislation is. Of course, the rape is not allowed. That's obviously very clear. But again, we're talking over here about the law of the seclusion. That is the rabbinic law. You're not allowed to even be together. You have today, for example, in doctors' offices, where if it's a male doctor with a female patient today, a lot of medical practices will not allow the male doctor to be secluded in the room with the female patient unless there is another individual there, usually a female woman. So they are adopting that in certain ways. There's other laws that are fences around the Torah. You have, for example, muktzah, with not handling certain items on Shabbos, even if technically they are allowed. So there's many things that are a safeguard that we shouldn't come to do a worse, something worse, a law that's worse, even though technically the thing itself is not as bad. The Torah says, text number 8, Ushmartem es mishmarti, you shall safeguard my charge. The Torah is telling us as well to keep protection. You have to put a safeguard for the mitzvahs so that no one shall come to violate them. You understand the importance of a fence around the manhole or electrical grid? Same thing as when it comes to keeping Torah mitzvahs. We don't want anyone to veer off the path and to come mistakenly into doing things that they're not allowed to. So the Torah is telling us, make a safeguard, do things that is going to protect you from not violating the Torah in any way. And there's many things that we do that is part of this, many different things that is a measure of staying safe. Now the truth is that there is a bit of a deeper explanation to this as well, and we're going to read this in text number 9. Text number 9 together, page 80. There are many fences and boundaries. For anyone that came in later, by the way, if you want the student book, you can look in the chat box. You'll find the student books that you can download, and there's also a Google link that you could open it up online. Every time I say Google, my phone opens up. It thinks that I'm saying, hey, Google. I'm not saying, hey, Google. Okay. There are many fences and boundaries that the sages enacted mainly during the Second Temple era. The era of the First Temple was marked by a revelation of God. This revelation remained in some respects even during the 70 years of exile. During the Second Temple era, the sacred light was lacking and the darkness of opposing forces intensified. The sages therefore enacted fences and boundaries to overcome the great darkness. Therefore, from one generation to the next, as the darkness intensifies, we correspondingly add protections and boundaries. So the more darkness, the more we have to protect ourselves, because the more you don't see the light. At the time of the First Temple, it was much more clear. You were able to see God's revelation there, so no one was going to come to make those mistakes. Even then, there were things that happened, even with the great revelation. But afterwards, with the Second Temple, and much later, many of these things had to be enacted in order to protect us. That's when the idea of prayer, for example, came about. Well, they always had prayer, but the siddur, the way we have it today, was enacted when Ezra came back to rebuild the Second Temple. And many of these laws came in order to protect Jewish people at that time from not violating the mitzvahs, being that there was much more darkness. So we had to combat it to protect ourselves more, and that's when many of these laws came about. We still didn't talk about the third one. The third case that was brought about, Tikkun Hadas. Tikkun Hadas is a religious enactment. that this is not something which is a safeguard from coming to do a commandment, but this is a general religious enactment. What is it? So let's take a look at the third one. The early sages enacted that, I'm not sure I have the picture here, enacted that lectures should begin to publicly teach, the lecturer should begin to publicly teach the laws of the holiday 30 days before the holiday begins. And that is a religious enactment because people did not know what to do. And so therefore, they said that you shall not that you shall start teaching people 30 days before. So this, number one, reminds people to begin preparing for the upcoming holiday, and it also teaches them the laws that you should know what to do. So it is the rabbis of the time, it is your responsibility to educate the people, to let them know and understand what is expected of them with the upcoming holidays. By the way, going back to offense, so when a holiday falls out on Shabbos, for example, Rosh Hashanah, we don't blow the shofar. On Shabbos, on Purim, we don't read the Megillah on Shabbos. On Sukkot, we don't shake the lulav on Shabbos. All these are offense, so that you shouldn't come to transgress the law of carrying on Shabbos. So that's another example of a fence law. But this is talking about the mitzvah to educate the Jewish people before the holiday, so that they shall know what to do. Text number 10. While the temple stood, the early sages legislated that lecturers should begin to publicly teach the laws of the holiday 30 days before the holiday begins. That being said, we have a holiday coming up now, the holiday of Shavuos, and we are now less than 30 days before, so it is our responsibility, my responsibility, to teach the people about the laws of Shavuos, and that's why we will be having some Shavuos classes as well, to educate the people on how to celebrate Shavuos too. Okay, here's another example. The Torah tells us, "V'yachalta v'sevata v'rachta," you shall eat, you shall be satiated, and you shall bless, which is what we know today as the benching, right? The benching. The Torah says you shall eat, you shall be satiated, and you shall bless. Doesn't say what to bless. Text number 11. Upon descent of the manna, Moses instituted the recitation of the first blessing of the grace after meals. Moses taught us the first blessing of what we know today as the benching when the Jewish people received the manna. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, hazan et haolam kulo b'tuvo. That is a blessing from Moses. In addition, there's the second one came from Joshua. No delecha Hashem Elokeinu. That one came from Joshua. The third one, Rachem, came from the men of the Great Assembly, and the other ones came a little bit later. Let me go through some other interesting enactments that we do today that you may not know are rabbinical enactments. Moses legislated that we read the Torah on Shabbos, Monday, and Thursday, so we don't go 3 days without hearing the Torah. And Ezra added that we shall read the Torah by Shabbos Mincha. That was a legislation from Moses. Yeshua ben Gamla enacted that communities should establish free schooling for small children in every city, Talmud tells us. One thing that we do, many of us do, which is a biblical command, and many people don't even know it's a biblical command, is lighting Shabbat candles. Lighting Shabbos candles to properly observe Shabbos was instituted by our sages for the reason that it should not be dark in Shabbos, and we should be able to honor Shabbos properly, and it should be a good atmosphere in the home in Shabbos. So here's a few examples of mitzvahs that are legislated. Of course, we talked before about the menorah that came about due to a holiday. Purim is a rabbinic mitzvah. So many of these things that we do that are so common in our tradition today, we don't even know that many of them are actually biblical commandments. It talked about Natilas Yadayim, washing our hands, as being a biblical commandment. So there are many of these things that we don't even know that they are that they are biblical commandments, and yet this is the way that we don't even realize where they come from. So now, many people say, okay, so you're basically giving the rabbis a clean slate, because the rabbis do whatever they want. The answer is no. You cannot just enact anything that you want to enact. Before I continue on, anyone have any questions before I continue on? Questions or comments before I continue on? Unmute yourself or write it in the chat. Otherwise, I will go on. Okay, so are there any limitations?
I have a question.
Yes.
Was it the rabbis or the Kohanim that explained what needed to be done for holidays?
No, the rabbis. The Kohanim don't make laws. The Kohanim's job is to work in the temple. They have to follow whatever they're told to do. It's the rabbis at the time that make those laws. The Kohanim, their job is to work in the temple the way they're told to. There are certain laws in the temple which were enacted by rabbis at the time. There were a lot of issues that came up in the temple that had to be dealt with.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Oops. Okay, so now comes the question of limitations. Is there any limitations, or do we say you have a clean slate and you can do whatever you want? And of course not. The answer is no. You can't just enact anything you want. There has to be certain rulings in how to do so. So number one, the Torah tells us very clearly what the first limitation is. That is, shall not add to the word I command you, nor shall you subtract from it. You must keep all the commandments of God, your Lord, which I am instructing you. Okay? So we have it very clear that you must make it clear that it's not a biblical law. You can't be saying we're adding to what God says. No, you're not. God has the laws. You cannot add. Now you say, okay, so how do I know the difference? So the difference is, in a matter of doubt, biblical law is dealt with strictly, while rabbinic law is dealt with leniently. Let's read text 13. If a bet din would forbid fowl with milk, saying that it is included in the category of a kid and therefore biblically forbidden, it would be adding to the Torah. If, however, the bet din says the Torah permits fowl with milk, but we are prohibiting it, and we will notify the people that this is a decree that aims to prevent transgression, this is not called adding, but making a fence around the Torah. So they have to make it very clear when they say that we are not allowing you to eat fowl and milk. They have to say this is a rabbinic law. Doesn't mean that because it's rabbinic it's allowed, but let's give an example. If there's a doubt with regarding the law, then any doubt with rabbinic law is dealt with leniently. If it's a biblical law, it is dealt with more severely. So when it comes to milk and meat, let's take that as an example. You have a pot of milk and a piece of meat fell in, or vice versa. A pot of meat, pot of cholent, let's say, and some milk falls in it. Are you allowed to eat that or not? So it has to be, the law is, I'm not going to get into all the details of the law, but basically the law is it has to be at least a 60th more of whatever, either the milk or meat. It has to be a 60th more to allow that, okay? Could only 60 times more than meat than the milk, or vice versa. And what if you're not sure? So if it's a biblical law, in other words, if it's actual meat from an animal, then better not to, then you shouldn't use it. But if it was a question of chicken that fell in, for example, if milk fell into a chicken soup, but you're not sure if it's 60 times more. So if there's a doubt, then you could go more lenient when it comes to a rabbinic law. So there is one difference where we see that rabbinic law is not the same as biblical law. And it has to be clear. The rabbis have to make sure, don't think this is a biblical law. They are not allowed to come and change a law or say that we are adding another mitzvah to the Torah. There's 613 mitzvahs of the Torah. If they are adding the mitzvah to light Hanukkah candles, that is a rabbinic law. There are 7 official rabbinic enactments, like Hanukkah candles and Shabbos candles, but those are not considered part of the Torah laws. They cannot add that on. Then there's another thing which you may find interesting, and that is that when there is a rabbinic law that is made, it has to be made with the people in mind. It has to be made with a guideline that people can be able to follow this enactment. It can't be something that is not within the hands of people to be able to understand or keep. So, for example, we do not issue a decree unless the majority of the public can stand by it. So an example to this is in text 15. Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha said, from the day the Holy Temple was destroyed, it would have been proper to prohibit eating meat and drinking wine. But we do not issue a decree unless the majority of the public can stand by it. So really, we should never allow eating meat or drinking wine during the week. It's not referring to holidays during the week or Shabbos, but we know that most people can't stand by that, so therefore we don't do it. There's 9 days, the 9 days leading up to the 9th of Av, right? The first week of Av, where we don't eat milk and meat. Where we don't eat wine and meat, and even that's hard for people to keep. You know, all the kosher restaurants, they go crazy. What are we going to do during the 9 days? And they make a special menu, a special fish menu. Can you imagine if aside for the laws of kosher and only eating kosher meat, we're also told now you cannot eat any meat. You can only eat, let's say, fish. Okay? The Jews cannot eat meat, period. Jews will go pretty crazy from that. I think if you don't have any option of eating meat, actually, they probably would come up with some sort of fake meat that would probably have already been invented, right? Some sort of fake meat by Jews. They would have figured out a way to do it. But anyway, so if there is a law that is not doable by most of society, then our sages are not allowed to enact such a law. Another one, if a court issued a decree, but after the decree was issued, the practice did not spread throughout the majority of the community, then the decree is nullified. Okay, that's in text number 16, page 84. So if they did issue a decree, but it was not originally accepted, then it's nullified. An example of this is Daniel, the prophet Daniel, banned the consuming of kosher oil if it had been produced by non-Jews. For example, we have this law with regards to wine that was made by non-Jews. This is a law. You're not allowed to eat wine from non-Jews because it may have been used for idolatry. And he wanted to say the same thing. You cannot use oil made by non-Jews. It was never accepted. So could you imagine if we were never allowed to use Bertolli's olive oil? Another example was Ezra wanted to enact that if any male had any sort of what's known as a balkari, if he had any sort of semen discharge, he should not be allowed to study Torah. And he removed that law, and it no more became accepted. Because in other words, without going to mikvah is what we're talking about. Because that would require people to go to mikvah very often, and not all of them are capable of always doing that. So here you have a few examples of things that don't work out, and there are rabbinic laws that don't always come. So we don't say that, well, the rabbis could just do whatever they want, they could say whatever they want, and even if it's impossible, no, it has to be something that is doable by the people and something that they are able to accept. So this is all the different types of laws that we had and we discussed until now. So we have enactments, we have fences, we have We have legislations. All these are different types of rabbinic laws. But there's still one area that we did not get to. Are there any questions before we get to the last type of law, the last type of thing, last whatever you want to call it, section? Any questions? Any comments? Any hate mail? Okay, the last section of what we call of human-made laws is what's known as customs. And this is perhaps the most common within the Jewish area as far as rabbinic laws go, customs. There's many, many customs, and customs are not necessarily accepted by all Jewish people. They may be accepted by one community. It may be accepted by one type of Jews. For example, Ashkenazi Jews have the custom not to eat rice and legumes on Passover. The Sephardim never adapted that custom. Okay, so that's one type of thing that we do. There are Chabad customs, there are Israeli customs, there are American customs, there's all kinds of customs. One that comes all the way from the Talmud customs in text 17. The citizens of Beishan had the custom not to go from Tyre to Sidon on Friday. Okay, these are all cities in today's Iraq, I believe, or Syria. I think there are cities in Syria actually today. They were all coastal cities. They would not go from Tyre to Sidon on Friday. Their children went to Rabbi Yochanan and said to him, "For our ancestors this was possible, for us it is impossible." It said to them, "Your father had already taken this stringency upon themselves, as it says, 'Hear my child, the instruction of your father, and forsake not the teaching of your mother.'" So what was he telling them? They were saying, "We don't want to keep this custom anymore." So he was saying to them, "Hey, this is the custom of your people. You can't just say that you don't want to keep the custom anymore." The same is true. There was a big push, especially this year, that Ashkenazi Jews should not keep the custom of not eating legumes on Passover, and it was basically not accepted that it should be thrown out of the window, because this is the way Ashkenazi Jews always accepted it. If this is your custom, then for you it is law. As text 18 says, and the Tosfot says, the custom of our ancestors is part of Torah. A custom is as if it is actually part of Torah. We have to see it that way. We have to see it as important that way. Ordinary people behaving in a certain way with intention of enhancing their relationship with God is accepted in that way. So in this case of the Beishan community, it became their official custom of that town, of that city, to keep things in that way. And so Rabbi Yochanan said, you can't just decide not to do it if this is the accepted custom of your community. Now, Jewish custom is not something from the Torah. It's not received law. It's not derived law. It does not originate in legislated Torah. This is something that a community adapts for themselves for whatever reason it may be, and it's known as a minhag. A minhag is a certain town of all Jewry, depending on what it is. Example custom, which you see on your screen, is the bride giving a ring for kiddushin. I'm sorry, the groom giving the bride a ring to buy a wedding, because according to law, even according to rabbinic law, you don't have to give a ring. You could give anything of value you could give in order to betroth a woman. But it became the custom to use a ring, and to use specifically a gold ring for this, without getting into all the details of why it's done. A ring serves as a constant. It brings about the wedding commitment. The idea of being round, circle, going around the finger. There's many aspects to it of why we do it. But this already became the Jewish custom, and so that's what we do. We use a ring for the kiddushin. And as we said, there's many different customs that people take upon themselves. There's certain things that are Chabad customs. There is a Chabad custom, for example, that every Shabbos Mavarchim, every time we bless the new month, every Shabbos, every 4 weeks when we bless the new month, we say the entire book of Tehillim in the morning, the entire book of Psalms. This is an adapted custom that we do, and we don't divert from that. There's a Chabad custom to have a farbrengen on those Shabbos, to have a Hasidic gathering. What are some notable holiday customs that all Jewish people keep? Well, here's some that you may not know are actually that they're customs. You may even think that these have been laws and traditions all the way going back to Moses, but they're not. These are customs. Let me tell you a few that you probably have heard about, but didn't know that these are customs. On Rosh Hashanah, we eat an apple dipped in honey. That is a custom. It is not a law. The Torah, the only biblical law on Rosh Hashanah is to hear the shofar. The rabbinical law on Rosh Hashanah is to say the verses of the shofar, which we do in the Musaf prayer, and to blow the shofar each of those times. But eating an apple and honey is a custom. Yom Kippur, wearing a white garment, wearing what we know as a kittel, is a custom. On Sukkot, the famous festival that we know of as Hoshaina Rabbah, the great Hoshaina, when we take a willow branch on the 6th day of the festival. Some of you join us this year. We did have a minyan this year, and we did it for the first time as a community. That is a custom enacted by the prophets, by the Nevi'im. Simchat Torah, dancing with the Torah, nowhere in rabbinic law or in Jewish law or in biblical law that says that you shall dance with the Torah on Simchat Torah. That is a 100% Jewish custom. Where exactly it started is questionable, but that is a Jewish custom to dance with the Torah on Simchat Torah. The Torah says, rejoice on the last day of Sukkot and the festival. It doesn't say to dance with the Torah. On Hanukkah, there is a rabbinic law to light the menorah, okay? But according to the law of lighting the menorah, all you really have to do is light one candle each night. This whole concept of adding another candle each night, first night 1, second night 2, third night 3, that is a custom that we do that. It does say that's the best way to do it, but you don't have to fulfill the mitzvah. To fulfill the mitzvah, you can light one candle each night, and you fulfill the mitzvah of lighting a Hanukkah candle. On Purim, getting dressed up on the festival of Purim is a custom. Passover, we talked about not eating legumes, Ashkenazi custom. And on Shavuos, which is the holiday coming up very soon, is a mitzvah to eat dairy on Shavuos. There is no mitzvah in the Torah to eat dairy, but that is a custom. And that's why we will be doing this week a wonderful baking with mati, or a wonderful dairy dish, most likely blintzes, either blintzes or cheesecake. It'll probably be cheesecake, actually. So now we went through all of the different types of the oral Torah. Number one, we talked in the first week about the received Torah, God-given explanations for each of the commandments. Last week, we talked about the derived Torah, laws that are derived from the written Torah and received Torah. Then today we talked about the last two, which is the legislated Torah, the new laws legislated by the rabbinic sages, and the customs which are initiated by the people to enhance this aspect of Judaism. So all this together makes part of the oral Torah. Before we get to the last part, are there any questions? Before we move to the last part, you can either put it in the chat box or you can ask it. Then we'll get to the last point, which is the mystical value of the minhag, a deeper, a more mystical aspect to it. Okay, so we will continue on then. No one has questions. It could be two things: either that everyone understands 100%, or that no one gets anything what I'm saying, so you have no questions. I'm not sure which one it is. Okay.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
may I ask, I think on Shabbat, on the amount of wax for the Shabbat candles, do you have to have, first of all, 2 or 3 candles to light on Shabbat?
You have
And
you
how long
you
do
have
they
two
to last?
two
Is that a
two
custom?
candles. You have 2 candles,
Okay,
and that is the mitzvah. The mitzvah is to have 2 candles. The custom is that many people have the custom to add a candle for each child. That is a custom. The mitzvah is to light 2 candles, and the custom is to add for each child. So again, there's an example of a custom versus a mitzvah. The rabbinical, lighting candles is a rabbinical mitzvah. It's lighting 2 candles, and many people have the custom, like I said, to light 1 for each child in the family.
So therefore, you're saying one is legislated and one is customary.
One is
But none are in the Torah.
the mitzvah to light Shabbat candles is legislated law by the rabbis. They legislated law that you need to light candles. That's why you're able to make a blessing. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam v'hadlik ner shel Shabbat kodesh. It's not found in the Torah, but it is a rabbinic legislated law by our sages to light Shabbat candles. That is the law, to light 2 candles. That's the legislated law of the rabbis. The custom of many is to light 1 for each child in the family. That is not the mitzvah. The mitzvah is to light just the 2 candles. Okay? Is that clear? Now you froze. All right. We lost their internet went down. Okay. All right, next part. Okay, you got it? So now we're going to talk on a bit of a spiritual aspect to this. As we discussed in lesson 2, the general point of the mitzvahs is that we as people should be part of the whole aspect of making the Torah, to fuse a harmony between God and the Jewish people, and by bringing about this connection between what we are doing, what we're instituting within the Torah, and by harmonizing that with the divine, that is a very very powerful connection that we have with God. God wants that it shouldn't be a one-way process, that it shouldn't be that I am telling you what to do. I am the boss in heaven telling you that this is the way you should keep it, and this is what it goes. God wants that it should be a paradigm where the physical world is integrated with everything that happens in the divine. And that happens when we put our part to the Torah together with what God is giving us. If a teacher just tells everything to the student, then the student is not really growing in themselves. A good teacher is one who gives projects to the students that the students should be able to do on their own, and that they should be able to grow and appreciate what they're doing and what they're being taught in their own right. And so for our job as a people is that our world has to transcend its current state and connect with the loftier place. And this is done by each of us doing our part. Like the teacher saying, you go do a project, telling the student, you go do a project. God is saying, I'm giving you the Torah. Now I want you to build on that and make that part of that as well. This is what we call dir b'tachtonim, making a divine place for God here. And it has to come from below. God wants our hand in the making of Torah and the connection with divine to be gifted from above. But it does take a certain measure from what God is giving us as well. It has to be within the rules. Just like when a teacher gives a student a project, you want that student, he has to say, this is the guidelines of what I want your project to be. And the student has to work within those guidelines. In each of these categories, we bring more about the balance between the divine and the human interaction over here. So the first level, the level of the received Torah, is taking the received. Okay, how do we make this balance between the divine and the human? So the first one, the level of the received Torah. So that's a one step, but still there isn't as much human interaction there. The divine is basically giving everything, and the human is not as much involved. God is saying, this is what I want you to do, and I'm giving you the way it is. The derived Torah, there's a little bit more human interaction. God is saying, here's the Torah, work with it, find the keys, the notes that are hidden within the Torah, try and understand it, try and build on it. So the contribution of man is considerably more pronounced. We're no longer just passing on the words of God like a funnel. We're working on it to create the development of the Torah. Then you have the next step, which is the legislative, where there's much more balance now with the human and the divine. Because over here, we're actually legislating, we're giving our parts and saying, we also have a contribution to what the Torah is giving us, and then it manifests much more because the divine commandment of the sages, the divine commandment is saying that the sages have the ability to make enactments, and so there is still a discernible presence of the above saying, I want you to make guidelines to keep the Torah properly in your way, and I'm giving you that power. But the most that we see the human interaction of the Torah is when it comes to Jewish customs. Because with the custom, it's something that's not even God telling us to do. It's something where it is completely there. It is completely, it's completely done by the one below. This is when we talk about the coming of Mashiach. The more we get closer to the times of Mashiach, the more Jewish customs become prevalent, because this is where you start to feel it more and more. When you take a look at what are the things that are most kept within the Jewish community today, a lot of them are things that are completely Jewish customs and not even Jewish laws. For example, how do most Jews celebrate the Rosh Hashanah? They'll tell you, I eat apples and honey. Okay, well, that's a Jewish custom. That's not the Jewish law. How do most people celebrate Passover? Well, they eat matzah, but they'll say they have a Seder. And many aspects to that is the custom. How do people like Hanukkah menorah today? They all count going one and up, right? How many people celebrate the last day of Sukkot? What's the way that they celebrate it most? With dancing with the Torah, Simchat Torah. That's completely a Jewish custom. Let's read text number 19. God's ultimate intention for us to make this world into a home for God through his own effort and initiative. Although this is accomplished through all Torah and mitzvahs, its accomplishment is most apparent when we observe Jewish customs, inasmuch as they are not commandments from above, but initiated entirely by the Jewish people. And the closer we get to the point of the complete perfection of the world, which is the coming of Mashiach, the closer, when more and more we focus on Jewish customs. To give an analogy of this is within marriage. You could say, well, God is not telling us to do it. So why are you saying that it's a good thing to do it if God's not telling us to do it? Well, let's take a look at stages of love, of marriage. There's different ways of expressing love. Yeah, of course, giving a gift is a nice way to express love. But what about cleaning the floor or taking out the garbage? Is that a way of expressing love? Well, if your wife tells you to take out the garbage, okay, and so if you're saying I don't want to do it, then that's not a good relationship. If you're saying, okay, I'm going to do it if you ask me to, okay, that's a little better. You'll do it. If the spouse asks you to do it, then you'll do it. But if you do it because you know that's what the person wants before they even do it, then that would not be that great. When I was first dating, I got Connie chocolate. I didn't know that she didn't like chocolate. Now I know that she doesn't like dark chocolate. She likes white chocolate. If you know your spouse enough, then you know what they like and what they don't like, and you don't have to ask them what it is that they like. So for one spouse, getting flowers or roses may be a beautiful thing. For another one, not. So, but you have to develop that relationship in order to get there. So yes, first you have to be told this is what I want. Then you have to say, okay, this is what you want. Now let's work on that a little bit more. And eventually you'll give that special gift that you know the person likes, even if they don't ask you for it at all. Let's read text 20. Rabbi Tauber. The hallmark of loving marriage is each partner's readiness to do the will of the other. If one partner expresses a desire for something, the other will do everything in his or her power to bring about this fulfillment. A greater love is demonstrated when each partner also strives to fulfill the implied will of the other. To the truly devoted spouse, it makes no difference if the desire has been explicitly expressed or merely hinted at, right? The hint is referring to the biblical commandment. It's hinted in the Torah. Or he or she will carry out the same devotion and commitment as for the loved one's gratification. Finally, there are those very special marriages in which there is no need to even the merest of illusion. So deep is the bond between husband and wife that each intuitively knows that the other wants of him or her. Indeed, when two people love each other to such a degree, there's no greater joy than the experience and that experience when one succeeded in sensing and satisfying the other's desire as one's own. So we don't necessarily. So yes, it's something that God tells us to do. It's something that God hints us to do. It's something that God gives us sages that tells us what to do and hints it through them what to do, or prophets or whatever. Then there's certain things that we're doing just because of our love of God. And those are the things that are the most powerful. When it comes Simchas Torah, we dance with such joy, such celebration with the Torah. That's the greatest joy that God has, seeing us dance with the Torah. He didn't tell us anywhere to dance with his Torah, but we're celebrating with the Torah because this is our Torah. God loves it to see Jews eating apple and honey. So this is the different stages. The first stage is a relationship we have when we do what God told us to do in the written Torah or the received oral Torah. The second stage is a relationship we have with God when we get his hints and discover discover new applications when engaged with the derived oral Torah. The third and highest stage is a relationship we have with God when we observe minhagim, customs that he did not say at all, but we know this is what he wants. I'm going to end off with a little game. We're not doing this in person, so this is going to be a little more difficult. But nevertheless, look to yourself. I'm going to tell you something, and you're going to tell me which of these categories does this fall into. Number one, Seder plate. Is this a received, derived, legislated, or customary? You can write it in the chat if you'd like. I can't open the chat. I can't open the chat. Okay, the answer is it is customary. Let's take a look at some other things. 4 cups of wine on Passover. Is it received, derived, legislated, or customary? Dun 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 dun. The answer is 4 cups of wine are legislated. This is a rabbinical law to have 4 cups of wine. It is a biblical law. On Pesach, it is a rabbinical law to have 4 cups of wine on Pesach. Another Passover example, reclining by the Passover Seder. Is that received, derived, legislated, or customary? The answer is reclining on Passover is also a legislated law. But when it comes to dipping a vegetable in salt water, the charoses in salt, not the charot, or the mar in charoses, or the vegetable in salt water, this is a Jewish custom. Sorry. I was wrong on that one. That is legislated. I got that one wrong. That is also legislated. I thought that was a custom, but I was wrong. That is legislated as well. Okay, let's take a look. Hiding the afikoman. Is that a mitzvah to hide the afikoman? No, that is a custom. That is a custom to hide the afikoman. These are all things with regards to Passover. A few more things that we do on Passover, since we just had it. Retelling the story of Exodus. Is that received, derived, legislated, or customary? Retelling the story of Exodus is received. Okay? That God told Moses, you shall tell the story. That is in the Torah, received. The 4 sons is derived. Okay, the Torah actually tells us, and we hint out about the 4 sons from the Torah. Washing hands before matzah. Washing hands when we eat ever is a legislated law. Eating matzah is a received law. It is a biblical law to eat matzah. Same thing, the amount of matzah is a received law, how much matzah to eat. Okay, the fact that we eat a kizayis, which is roughly about a third of a matzah. Hillel sandwich, is that a derived or legislated or customary? That is legislated. It is made by Hillel. He is a rabbi who legislated that law. How about eating an egg on Passover? Is that a mitzvah or not? That is a custom, a Jewish custom, eating the egg. And finally, Elijah's cup on Passover is a Jewish custom as well. So here you have, just within Passover, look how many different things there are. That some things are received, some things are derived, some things are legislated. And the problem is that people just throw out things like, I don't want to listen to the rabbis. Okay. So you're not going to listen to the rabbi who tells you how to set up a Seder plate, but you're going to have a Elijah's cup, which is completely customary. And yet how many secular Jews keep Elijah's cup? So without knowing where things come from, it's very difficult to know what are the proper decisions that we're making within our Jewish traditions. All right. That's enough of this video.
Lesson 3. 1. The Torah authorizes the sages to enact new ordinances, and God guides them to the proper conclusions. 2. Rabbinic enactments are intended to fix societal problems, safeguard against biblical transgression, or promote religious observance. 3. Enactments issued by the sages must be presented as rabbinic laws, not as God-given instructions. 4. The sages may not pass an enactment unless they assess that the majority of the population can tolerate it, and if the population never accepted it, the law is void. 5. Customs initiated by the people to enhance religious observance reflect our deepest bond with God. 6. The categories of Torah that place greater emphasis on human crucial variation. Next week. For many, Talmud is synonymous with debate. Indeed, Jewish law abounds with disagreements and
Okay, so next week we're going to talk about the idea of having disagreements within Jewish law. Sorry. How can it be that there are Jewish laws that there's different opinions about? How can it be that you could have Abaye saying something